These primary master force organizers now go to work actively to transform primordial force into something which is emerging from nothingness into somethingness. And that's why the product of their efforts is called emergent energy. Energy emerging from the sole grasp of the unqualified absolute to the grasp of sub-absolute beings. These master force organizers are operating on the second floor of the firehouse. They are transcendental beings. And this is the energy domain of the ultimate, because whenever you're on the second floor of the firehouse, you're dealing with the ultimate. These primary master force organizers continue the manipulation of this energy. And still, the Orvantan government knows nothing of this. Now, out on Uversa, there is a council of equilibrium. The papers don't say much about this. But this council of equilibrium has to do with the mechanical problems of the maintenance of a physical superuniverse. This council of equilibrium is the super-creatural level of thinking, is at that level, and it's made up of associate transcendental master force organizers. These beings work in conjunction with the Orvantan government. They are the liaisons, so to speak, between the architects of the master universe and the government of the time-space creations. Members of this council, or I guess they're members, they patrol Orvantan. And they are associate transcendental master force organizers. And they're looking for evidence of the work of the primary force organizers. Apparently they have to find it. Apparently they aren't told about this, because the paper tells us that 987 billion years ago, an inspector discovered that the fact that space conditions were favorable for energy materialization in what was then an easterly segment of Orvantan. Let's say that my guess of the age of Orvantan is right. Let's say it's 50,000 trillions of years old. I would judge that the ancients of days maybe weren't here for the first couple trillion years. But I think they've been here for more than 95% of the history of Orvantan. I think there was a comparatively short time where the force organizers were here and they weren't. But ever since then, they've been here. Havona, prior to the super universes, was an absolutely stable creation. But with energy fluctuations taking place out here, I think external mass could set up internal stresses in Havona. And I think it's the job of these power centers to compensate any such stresses. I think when this thing is pretty well done, if you can visualize that, then I think again they might be superfluous. This inspector went back to Uversa and reported. We could put it in our language. He said, well, the boys have been at work again. We got a nebula to get set up. And they said, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. And so, 87 billion years later, they issued a permit. Yeah, a building permit. And they issued it to this inspector. And he assembled his crew, bulldozers, CBs, and whatnot, and they headed out for this area and took over. Now, what they did was they moved at right angles, some up and some down. They moved at right angles to the plane of the nebula that they wanted to emerge. And the nature of counterclockwise motion in this superuniverse space level determined the direction of the whirl of this thing. Visualize, maybe, I don't know how many there are, but they have to be at least two. Visualize one associate force organizer moving above this card table and another one moving below it. And the counterclockwise basic nature of all motion would determine that it would then start spinning in the plane of the card table counterclockwise. These force organizers are now taking the puissant energy which was produced by the active function of their senior colleagues, and they are transmuting it into gravity energy, or energy responsive to the pull of paradise gravity and ultimately to the pull of linear gravity.
Do you call that gravitas?
That is not. That is gravity energy. It is the second form of emergent energy. And the two together are called ultimata.
Oh, we're way back there.
We are building automatons at this point.
But all this is under emerging energy, right?
These are the two steps in emerging energy. Emergent energies have two phases because there are two phases of force organizers. And the preceding energy, segregata, the force organizers couldn't come out here, the primaries, couldn't come out here and dislodge this from the grasp of the unqualified absolute. All they can do is come out here and take action based on what the conjoined actor has already done. Their function prior to the level of emergent energy is passive. But on segregata, they can now begin to work actively. And when the primaries have done their job, they have produced the A form of emergent energy, which is called puissant energy. And this is something which is discoverable by an associate force organizer. And when he discovers this, he knows he can go to work on energy at that level. And he produces the second form of emergent energy, which is gravity energy. We now have mass appearing, basic mass. This is the ultimatonic stage of energy, because the ultimaton is the smallest unit of mass. Paradise gravity doesn't altogether act on something which is pre-mass, but it will act the instant mass appears. Now, at this point, the story in outer space diverges from the story in the seven superuniverses. In outer space, I think these associate force organizers go right on fostering the further elaboration of matter to the electronic level of matter and to the building up of matter as we know matter. The ultimaton is not matter as we know it. We have yet to find the ultimaton. We recognize matter only when 100 ultimatons aggregate into one of the basic forms of an electron. Then we recognize that this is matter. In outer space, I think these associate force organizers go right on building up matter to the end, to the point where our telescopes will reveal to us nebulae out there, like Andromeda. Let's go back now to Orvanton. These associate transcendental master force organizers worked for 25 billion years. We have that time span given us. They worked for 25 billion years, transmuting puissant energy into gravity energy. And then they turned the job over to the power directors of Orvanton. The power directors started to work with ultimatons. Evidently, the power directors require mass in order to manipulate things. And they can't work until the basic unit of mass has appeared. Then they take over. The rest of the story of this nebula is the story of the supervision of the power centers and power directors of our Bantan. They start with gravity energy, and they elaborate gravita out of gravity energy. Those two names are similar. They can confuse you. Gravita is the technical name for universe power. Gravity energy is the most mature form of emergent energy, or ultimata. Gravita is a name, gravita is not gravity.
No, I know.
However, it designates that level of energy, power, and mass which does respond to the kind of gravity that we know about.
Linear.
The gravity response of the automaton is to the circular gravity of paradise. And this paradise gravity differs from what we call gravity in two senses. First of all, it's circular in its pull, and second, it is not diminished by the square of the distance traversed. Paradise gravity acts on an automaton in our Bantan, in the first outer space level or the second outer space level, with equal force. Paradise gravity is absolute gravity. Again, let's consider the three universes. The big universe, or macrocosmos, the middle-sized universe that we recognize, the cosmos, and the tiny universe, the microcosmos, the universe of the atom. There are three gravities. Paradise gravity governs the macrocosmos, the big ball of wax. The smaller units in this cosmos, the solar systems, the nebulae, are governed by linear gravity. And linear gravity appears only when you reach electrons and atoms. In the ultimatonic stage, there is no linear gravity. And then, when you do get to atoms, you have tiny gravity, or the tremendously powerful pull of the atomic nucleus, which holds that electron swinging in its orbit. And when you think of an atom, I wish you'd think of our solar system. Our solar system is an atom in the larger, is a cosmic atom. Just as the whole space level arrangement is the macrocosmic atom. All of these space levels swinging clockwise, counterclockwise around the absolute material nucleus. There are three levels of atoms. There are atoms, solar systems, and the whole big thing.
Within the atom, this drawing power is directly related to paradise.
No, it's directly related to the atomic nucleus.
Only that.
Right.
It's a little
Right.
independent.
Yes,
system.
it's a third form of gravity.
Okay.
Here, the nucleus is to an electron as the sun is
Yeah.
to a planet.
Yeah, if it is independent.
And the gravity of our sun is an almighty power within the confines of the solar system.
Yeah.
But if you went out very far beyond the solar system, you would find that the gravity of our sun was weakening tremendously. And that's exactly the way it is with the drawing power of the nucleus. As you get out to the outermost possible orbits of the electrons, it begins to fumble. And that's why you have radioactive matter in the heavier elements. The last 10 electronic circuits are not too well governed by the atomic nucleus. And that's why atoms fly off in uranium and thorium. They're trans-Pluto and trans-Pluto planets. And any nearby passing body could pull them out of the sun's grasp. The sun would be holding these planets very feebly. As long as nothing came near, the sun could hold him in leash. But if anything came near, the sun might be apt to lose him, as Angona lost some of its planets when it passed near our solar system. These would have been the outermost planets in the Angona system.
They both have the inverse ratio.
Yes, and the distances in the atom are very tiny.
Yes,
Right.
like that.
I'm sure that we're distorting this, but I'm sure this is the most helpful concept that the average mind can entertain. An atom is a tiny solar system, and an atom is mostly empty space, just as our solar system is mostly empty space. And when you think of that, then you can see why a spirit being can pass through matter. This matter is mostly empty space. If we can send rockets up in the solar system, we're dealing with the porousness of the solar system. And matter is a very porous thing. This is the physicist's concept of matter in contrast to the practical concept of matter, which is very solid. Here, let's get our names straight. Circular gravity is paradise gravity. It operates independently of time and space. Solar system gravity is what we call gravity. It's what keeps us sitting firmly in our chairs. It's what holds this planet in its orbit around the sun. Linear gravity operates independently of time, but not of space. If you have 100 units of gravity, that's a pull, and you go out 2 units of space, you will then have only, would be divided, you would then have only 25 units of gravity. Do you follow me?
Yes.
Gravity, let's straighten out our thinking. Gravity is what gives mass weight. We speak of a pound of weight, and we think that is a measure of mass. We say, how much have we got here? I've got a pound. That is not a measure of mass. That is a measure of the gravity action on that mass. And since, to all practical intents and purposes, the only gravity we deal with is the gravity of the Earth, we use this interchangeably. But if we would take this mass to Jupiter, we would find it weighed much more than a pound, because the gravity of Jupiter is a great deal greater than the gravity of the Earth. Now, there is a word which can be used to describe that mass independently of gravity. This word is poundal. It's a term in physics. Poundal designates a unit of mass regardless of the gravity field. It's defined as that which weighs 1 pound at a certain place on Earth, because the weight of a poundal of mass will vary slightly depending where you weigh it on the face of the Earth. The Earth is not a perfect sphere, and the weight of something varies a little bit as between a measurement taken at the pole and a measurement taken at the equator. Your spring scale will differ a little. Let's tell the story of our nebula. We can name it then. We now have the Andronover Nebula, which is becoming real in terms of the intelligences of our Bantan. In other words, we've got a very upsetting thing taking place out here in space. We have new linear gravity appearing. And this changes the whole equilibrium of surrounding material creations. It's upsetting. Just as it's upsetting when you're in an elevator and it starts up or it starts down. It changes your equilibrium, doesn't it? Or if you're in an airplane and they go this way, your equilibrium has been changed. Or, what's even worse, you're trying to sit still on the chair and I'm reaching over pulling you. I'm pulling you off the chair. I'm pulling you out of orbit, because a new pull that never existed before is suddenly being felt by all surrounding material creations. And now you see how important it is that this gravity that we talk about diminish as the square of the distance. If it didn't fall down down as it passes through space, a new creation would disrupt everything. But as it is, while these surrounding space bodies and physical systems feel this new system, they don't feel it too badly. However, let's read what it says here. We're over here on page 652. By the time the Orbantan power directors had been at work 100 billion years, it says it was necessary to dispatch additional physical controllers to 9 surrounding material creations to afford support and supply cooperation to the power centers of this new material system which was so rapidly evolving. They put up some flying buttresses in the 9 nearest physical systems to try to keep this new system from having too disruptive an influence. You see, linear gravity is a property of mass at the atomic and electronic level. And this property appears and it produces a cohesive force. This is what holds our Earth together. If our Earth didn't have this property, then as it spins, it would throw up continents, mountain ranges, seas into space. But the force of our gravity of this planet is much stronger than the outgoing centrifugal force of the spin. More and more automatons are huddling into electrons. More and more super electronic aggregations are forming nucleuses of atoms and are swinging electrons into orbit by virtue of their superior pull. We are now witnessing the beginning of the great struggle between the centripetal or in-pulling force of linear gravity and the centrifugal or outgoing force of heat motion. This is the titanic tug of war. Can the nebula, as it grows, pull all things into itself? Or will orbital revolution, the spin, which was initiated way back when, will it win? This is the first great contention between heat motion and gravity control. Remember, heat and motion are 2 words which basically describe the same thing. Heat is a measure of motion, and motion is a measure of heat.
Are they moving against each other?
Yeah, they're sliding. They're sliding. In solid matter, the atoms or molecules are locked into a crystalline formation or a cellular formation. In liquid matter, they slide. In gaseous matter, they bounce around like independent tennis balls. But in order to do that, they got to move faster. Right.
Slide it fairly fast.
Yes. For liquid water to become water vapor, these molecules have got to attain the velocity of escape, just like we have to have the velocity of escape in a rocket. 2 things are happening at the same time. Every time 100 automatons aggregate, a little bit of linear gravity is born. Because an electron has mass, and it has mass in terms of linear gravity.
What causes the huddling?
It's the nature of the electron, the constitution of matter. Electrons tend to huddle. Automatons.
Yeah.
This is the way the architects of the master universe designed matter. They designed it with these properties. I know they designed it because it refers to the superfinite wisdom which designed material units which are at the one time so flexible and on the other hand so stable. I think the architects worked out the design of matter. Every time these automatons huddle, we get some form of an electron. just exactly how electrons and ultimatons huddle to produce an atomic nucleus, which is to an electron as our sun is to this planet, I don't know, and the papers don't say. But we know that all of this mass goes back to the ultimatons. Every time an atomic nucleus is born and grabs, let's say, one electron, we've got hydrogen, we have the birth of a little more linear gravity. As this nebula gets more massive, gravity becomes more powerful. It can pull things into it more strongly. If our sun somehow could be increased in mass, here's what would happen. Its gravity pull would automatically go up, and our Earth would move in towards the sun. And as it moved in, it would pick up speed until a new equilibrium was reached between the stronger gravity of the sun and the faster orbital revolution of the Earth. That's exactly what happens when an electron moves into different orbits at varying distance from the nucleus. And these are, I think, quantum jumps of energy. If our sun should diminish in gravity, I think we would move outward towards Mars. And as we moved outward, we would lose speed until our slowed down orbital revolution again hit a balance. If we could speed up the revolution of this Earth fast enough, let's say we attach a bunch of jets to it, we could escape from the solar system by going faster and faster against a constant gravity pull, or a diminishing gravity pull. All right. Let's go back to our real primitive concept. To all outward intents and purposes, nothing is becoming something. We cannot see water vapor. We can see clouds. It's the same thing, only now we're aware that there's moisture up in the air. We normally, except in fog, don't feel clouds. But when it rains, we feel the rain. This is a more tangible substance. And when that rain freezes, we've got something just as massive as a brick, just as hard, right? We've got ice. This is what is seemingly taking place in this nebula. Water vapor is becoming liquefied and then solidifying. And this is all a crude analogy as to what happens as these ultimatons, water vapor, it's mass in relation to paradise, but it's not mass in relation to anything else except another automaton. Like the lady in the zoo who asked the keeper, what is the sex of this hippopotamus? And he says, my good woman, well, what possible interest would that be except for another hippopotamus? These automatons are interested only in other automatons. Now, as our water vapor becomes liquid and then becomes ice, every time we have condensation, we have more gravity. This the heart of the nebula is becoming stronger in gravity as it becomes massive, as energy is converted into mass, so that there's a tendency to pull in stronger. At the same time, the revolution of matter is speeding up. So now you can begin to sense the titanic tug of war between the cohesive, centripetal, in-pulling forces of gravity and the outward, centrifugal motions of speed in orbit. And please remember, heat and motion are the same thing. When something moves faster, we call it getting hotter. That is our sensory name for an increase in velocity.
In all cases?
In all cases. There is no difference between heat and motion.
Gotta think about that.
All right, let's take heat away from water vapor and see what happens. It slows down and rains. Let's take heat away from water and we slow molecular velocity down until it crystallizes. Men observed motion and men observed heat. And not knowing the connection between the two, our language has two words for the same phenomena. Some things are observable to us as motion. Other changes are observable to us as heat. Practically speaking, we need two words. Now, they're united in the concept of hot rod, something which moves fast. But otherwise, they don't conjoin. The physicist thinks of these two phenomena as one and the same thing. Practically speaking, Bob doesn't hot into Los Angeles, he moves. Practically speaking, we don't increase the motion of molecules in water when we percolate coffee. We heat the coffee. It's the difference between realizing that this table is mostly empty space and at the same time, to all practical intents and purposes, just as solid and dependable as anything.
But when I walk, where's the heat? Of course, if I walk long enough, I heat up.
Yes, there's some heat. You are burning energy. In order to move, you must draw upon what we call heat. And that is stored energy.
Yeah, work and energy.
This is the sugar in your bloodstream, which is being oxidized, giving off heat, which supplies the energy that we call muscular motion. We're burning fuel. We have a carburetor system, which we call lungs. We got to get something that will support combustion right into that bloodstream. And that's the function of the hemoglobin, or the iron molecules in the red blood, which go up to the lungs, pick up oxygen, they rust and turn red, just like iron does when it turns red. This rusty blood is very valuable because it's carrying oxygen. It carries oxygen into the tissues where there's sugar. And we oxidize that sugar and produce waste materials and carbon dioxide. We breathe out carbon dioxide. This is the smoke of the fire. Always remember, there's no difference between rotting, rusting, burning, and exploding. They're all the same thing. It's just a matter of time. Rusting and rotting is an oxidizing process that takes a long time. In burning, we oxidize faster. In exploding, we oxidize fastest. Are you with me?
Yes.
See, what we're trying to do is to clean up our semantics so that we can go from practical language to precise language. This is everything that we know about physical things or physical energies. This is electricity. This is light, sunlight. This is infrared, this is ultraviolet. This is the whole physical universe as we know it. We know nothing of the physical universe before this stage, and Havona is too far away for us to know of any other kind of physical universe.
Where is the line that changes from emergent type of energy to universe power type of energy?
It is when ultimatons become electrons.
All things.
There is the critical change. Ultimatons attract each other, but that's not linear gravity. But an electron has linear gravity of an infinitesimal sort. And when you build electrons into atoms, now you're building something that we can see. When you get enough of them, you got a brick. And if you have enough bricks, you got a planet. You follow me? And while we don't sense gravity in the brick, we sense it when we get enough of them to have a planet. Or even a planetoid. If you could land on an asteroid, a little chunk of rock, let's say, make it 100 cubic miles. That isn't very big. That isn't much bigger than cubic Los Angeles, right? You would adhere to the surface of that little rock if you were there in a spacesuit. But if you jumped, you might jump all the way out into space. You might not come back. Gravity field would be so feeble. Conversely, if any of us, if Bud's home could be transported to Jupiter, assuming that the atmosphere could be clean, we'll seal it. When we went on Jupiter, the gravity field would be so strong, we would be pulled downward so badly that we would run all over the floor like pancake batter. We would be instantly killed by Jupiter's gravity. If we were on the moon and the moon had air, this would be an interesting experience. We would be tremendously strong because our muscles would be used to an Earth's gravity field, and on the moon, I suppose we could jump 50 feet into the air. In a larger planet, let's say a planet twice our size, Jupiter's out. It's much too big for life as we know it. But let's say we've got a planet that is twice as massive as Earth. I've forgotten the ratio. Would it have twice the gravity or 4 times the gravity? Let's say it's twice the gravity, and that may be wrong. It would be pretty hard to build people who could move, say, 300 pounds. That's a pretty heavy guy. Consider how sluggish a 300-pounder is here on Earth. So, let's make the people smaller. Let's make 75-pound people. We'll have them. A real tall guy will be 4 feet tall. This is a tall guy. And we can, by reducing mass, we can enable him to function efficiently and agilely in this stronger gravity field. Conversely, on Mars, we want a bigger person because the gravity field is weaker. There, on the moon, a 300-pounder would only weigh 100 pounds. He can move around. Size is the size of the person varies oppositely with the size of the planet.
While we're touching on this, explain the Adamites' amazing height.
They were strong. They were real strong people.
Supermen.
Right. And they didn't stay that tall.
How about the Watusi tribesmen in Africa?
Well, you had 2 strains of giantism appear in the evolutionary peoples. Both the orange and the green people developed strains of giantism.
And
Goliath is a hangover from that.
And these could possibly be orange or green?
Yes.
Their coloring isn't the same.
No, but the strain might be there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that everybody has to be the same height, but it means that a person of 8 or 10 feet height may be nearing the limit of human efficiency here. Don't forget also Adam and Eve probably had a muscle structure that went considerably beyond ours. What was he, 8 feet in height?
Yeah, 8 feet.
That's about as tall as they've come.
Were the corporeal people, but they don't mention their height. Van and Nod.
I would guess that they were in proportion to the
Andonites.
Andonites. Yeah, they're going to work together. So, can we go back to the spin?
Yes.
Do you have a mental picture now of 2 contending forces, each of which are growing? Mass continues to be born in the nebula. And every time mass is born, gravity appears. At the same time, it spins faster. And that means a force, which is the opposite of gravity, is fighting this gravity. Our Earth is stable in its orbits only because these 2 contending forces are exactly in equilibrium. We got 2 groups of men in a tug of war, and we've shifted our sides until we have got exactly the same muscle power on both ends of the rope. The net effect is a stationary rope, right? But that doesn't mean that they're not tugging as hard as they can tug. The sun, with all its might, is trying to pull this Earth into itself. And this Earth, with all its might, is trying to escape from the pull of the sun. And the 2 forces are exactly equal. 600 billion years ago, the power directors had been working here for 200 billion years. And this was the height of the Andronover energy mobilization. The nebula had acquired its maximum of mass. At this time, it was a gigantic circular gas cloud, in shape somewhat like a flattened spheroid. You know, that's the shape of the Earth. That's the shape of paradise. This was the early period of differential mass formation and varying revolutionary velocity. Gravity and other influences were about to begin their work of converting space gases into organized matter. At this time, I can see only the lighter elements present. Hydrogen, lithium, oxygen, in gaseous form. Lithium we think of as a solid, but a lithium atom might exist freely in open space at this stage. Yeah, you get some pictures, but that's
Yeah.
good.
I got one of the Magellan Cloud, which I found.
This enormous nebula now began gradually to assume the spiral form and to become clearly visible to the astronomers of even distant universes. We have now reached a nebula which is like a nebula that we can see. The reason for the spiral appearance is because things are swinging out and then different orbits separate them. And when they come back in, they converge again and they become more visible. Actually, each of these spiral arms goes on out and then swings back into another spiral. And it's the cone effect of divergence and convergence. We see the base of the cone, but then we lose it as it becomes too diffuse out here. So that apparently that arm vanishes. It doesn't vanish. It merely vanishes to vision. It's too diffuse to be seen. This is the history of most nebulae. They are observed as a spiral phenomena before they begin to throw off suns. The nearby star students of that faraway era, as they observed these changes in the Andronover Nebula, saw exactly what 20th century astronomers see when they turn their telescopes spaceward and view the present age spiral nebula of adjacent outer space. So that a good deal of what went on prior to this point would not be visible to us. It's not only the force organizers, but even the power directors. Their early functions would represent something which we would have great difficulty in detecting. They've been out here roughly 200 billion years before the results of their work become visible. About the time of the attainment of the maximum of mass, the gravity control of the gaseous content commenced to weaken, and there ensued the stage of gas escapement. The gas streaming forth as two gigantic and distinct arms which took origin on opposite sides of the mother mass. The rapid revolutions of this enormous central core soon imparted a spiral appearance to these two projecting gas streams. The cooling and subsequent condensation. Now when they say cooling, that merely means the slowing down of motion. The cooling and subsequent condensation of portions of these protruding arms eventually produced their knotted appearance. Or subnebular gravity centers are beginning to appear here. These denser portions were vast systems and subsystems of physical matter, whirling through space in the midst of the gaseous cloud of the nebula, while being held securely within the gravity grasp of the mother wheel. But the nebula had begun to contract, which means gravity now is getting a little stronger grip on the core. Every time heat motion wins a little bit, in the victory, gravity is a little stronger in that area. It gets as it gives. But the nebula had begun to contract, and the increase in the rate of revolution further lessened gravity control. And ere long, the outer gaseous regions began actually to escape from the immediate embrace of the nebular nucleus, passing out into space on circuits of irregular outline, returning to the nuclear regions to complete their circuits, and so on. Now, they didn't escape from the control of the nebula. They escaped from being a part of the central core, in the same way that our Earth has escaped from the confines of the sun, but not from the control of the sun. unless they've done time, so to speak. The atoms usually have to serve on a world. The